Hello, student. We were discussing about one of the important and essential topic in programming C, that is structure. The structures comes under the user-defined data type, which is basically is very useful whenever we want to store the record, which are the heterogeneous form, because the array and the string are not capable to store the data element if the elements are in the different form, but the structure and the union basically is used to store the data element or store the record if the data elements are in the heterogeneous forms or the different in forms. So in this lecture we are going to discuss about the array of structure. So what is basically the array? That is, we have already familiar. It is basically is used to store the finite set of the element of similar type, and structure basically is a user defined data type, which is basically is used to store the heterogeneous type of the data type. Now in this lecture we are going to discuss about how this array means the finite set of the element of the similar type are going to be used in the structure, means where the structures are going to store the data element are in heterogeneous form. So far we have seen that at the time of defining the structures, we must have to specify what are the data element that is going to be stored. Suppose we are going to store a record about the student. So the student should have some name, there should have some roll number, there should have some marks. And now for store the record about all the individual students, we need the structure variable or the instances. So far on the last lecture also we have seen that how can we store the record of 2 student or the 3 student. But what will be the case when we require to store the record about the student of, let's have 100 number, or let's have the 1000 number of the students? So in that case it is basically very difficult and is almost impossible to define that many number of the structure variable or that many number of the instances to store that many number of the students record. So as a result, as such, we know that whenever there have a more number of values or more number of record that we need to store, we can use an array. So here the array is going to be used in structure in the form of the structured variable, in the form of the instances. So here how can you define such structures? So let's have uh, struct. As such, we know that every structures start with the keyword struct followed by some name. Let's have struct name. Suppose this name of this structure, and you'll have to define the open braces, and inside this open braces you'll have to specify what are the data that is going to be stored in the structure, means what is the shape of that structure. So let's have the data type 1. For the data type 1, let's have the variable 1. Let's have data type 2. Let's have variable 2. Similarly, suppose data type n, let's have variable n. So in this structure we have defined a structure's name, that is struct name, which have n number of variables, and all the variables are in the heterogeneous form. That means n number of different data types. So suppose we want to store this record or this number of values against the 1000 number of instances or 1000 number of entities. So in that case, as such, we know that as many number of the values we want to store, we'll have to define that many number of variables of this structure type. So how can I declare the structure variable? So struct, let's have struct name, and here we'll have to define that variable. So far in the previous lecture we have seen that if there have need to store the record of the 2 student, we have defined the 2 variables, let's have a and b. Or if we need the store the record about the 3 students, we'll have to declare 3 variables name, let's have x, y, z, like that. But what will be the case if we need to store the 1000 number of the record? So in that case, instead of declaring this instance, we can use an array. So let's have a with have 1000. So it means we are going to store the record about the 1000 number of entities, and every entities are going to have this many number of values. Is this clear? And how can we store the record? Similarly, we may define that is A0 about the first name. Suppose if you want to store the record about the first entity, so there A0 for the variable 1. Similarly, for A0 for variable 2, dot dot dot. Similarly, A0 of variable n. Similarly, for storing the record about the second entity, so A1 of variable 1. Similarly, A1 of dot variable 2. Similarly, A1 of variable n. Similarly, in this way we will continue, and at the last we can store a 99 dot variable 1, a 999 dot variable 2, similarly a 999 of variable name. So this many number of the record that can be stored. Is this clear? Here, to store this many number of record, we can use simply some iterations, some loops for storing the record and display the same. So take an example, then it will be much clear to you. Take an example. Suppose write a program to store, sorry, to store the record of n students, where n may be asked by the user, n student, where each record means each record about the student, what are their attributes, what are their values. So where each record may consist name, roll number, let's have marks, and after this, where each record will consist only name, roll number, and marks, and display all the records or display the same. Okay. So in this problem, we have been asked to store the record of n number of students, where each record may consist name, roll, and marks, and display the same. We'll have to display the same as well. So how can we do so? So here we'll have to declare first as a struct, because here we are going to store the name, that will be nothing but the string that will consist a multiple set of the characters. Roll, let's have, it will be treated as a serial number, so let's be in integer. And for the marks, let's have it will be floating type. So here the three different values that is going to store against each and every student, and all the three data types are the different, so we will have to use the struct. So struct, let's have the name of the structures is student itself, and here we'll have to specify that how many number are what are the different data types. So there should have consist a name, so character name, let's have the length of the name, let's have it's 15. For storing the roll number, let's have it is integer type, is integer roll, and let's have the marks is floating type, let's have is float marks. Now this is going to be the shape, this is going to be the record about each and every student. As such, you know that every structures must have end with semicolon. So once we declare with this, our structure is ready. Now we are going to store the record of how many student. We'll have to store the n number of students. So what we need inside the main, we need to have n, because we are going to store the record about the n number of student, as well as we need for iteration purpose, means for the first student, second student, up to n number of students, we need iterations. Let's have I, and this much, and for storing the record in this structure, so we need the structure variable or we need the instances about this structure. So it should be struct student. Here how many number of the students, n number of students, but we cannot declare as a the n. You'll have to specify as such. We know that array there should have some constant values, the size should be constant. So let's have, we expecting that the maximum number of the student, it would be 1000. So let's have a 1000. So there is just two way, either we can define the number of instances or the number of variables of the structures like this fashions, or here also you may declare, means before ending this semicolon you can also define like this. So these are the two ways, either you can declare the structures with 1000 number of instances or 1000 number of variables like this, or you can declare like this. This is the choice is yours. So suppose we have declared the structure student like this fashions, and here what we need to know first, we need to know that we are going to store this record for how many number of the student, for n student. So here we'll have to ask the user that how many number of the student. So you may display the message like printf enter the number of students. How many number of the students against we are going to store the record. So once the user will provide any sort of the values, we need to scanf to take the input from the console input output. So it should be %d, because the number it should be in integer type at the ampersand of n. So n are going to have that how many number of the students that we're going to store, that is 5, 10, 100, and maximum it should be 1000, because here we have limited the size of this structure variable is 1000 only. So once we'll have the n, we'll have to store the record for against each and every student. So you may display the message like printf enter the records. So for displaying new line, you may mention the \n, and here how many number of records, n number of records, and every records are going to have this number of values. So here we need a loop. Let's have for I, it will start from 0, because as such we know that array is always begin with the index element 0, I less than n, because we are going to store the n number of record, and after inserting a first record we'll have to go to the next one is I plus plus. Now here for your benefit, you might display the message that for which student you are going to record. For the first student, so you may display the message, is optional completely, choice is yours. Printf enter name, roll, and marks of ith student or ith student. Also here for the ith student means for the first student, second, so here you may display like %d, %student, and this %d is for is nothing but your I. So here every time here you may write one \n also, that is completely your choice. Then ending with this. Now here the users are going to provide the values. So as such we know that to get the inputs of the string type, we could have used the gets. So you may write like gets about which one, a of I, because here we are going to store the record of the first student, so it will be a0 about the first one is should be name, so ai dot name will be done. And after inputting this, the user are going to provide the values of roll and marks. So to take the inputs, you can use the scanf %d, because here we are going to have the two records, one is integer type, one floating type, so %d and %f, that is ampersand of ai dot your roll and ampersand ai dot marks. So in these fashions you will can take the inputs from the user means n number of inputs from the user, and if you wish to display the same fashions. Here you may display the whole the records. Display the message. That's it. As such, you have taken the inputs from the user. Similar fashion, you can display the record about the n number of the student. So this way, that array of the structures can be used. As such, the structures also allow the nested structure. So what is actually the nested? As such, we know from the looping purpose that when the one loop comes inside of the another loop, we used to call as a nested loop. Similarly, whenever we place a structure inside of another structures, that is called as a nested structure. So when it is required, suppose we have to store the record about n number of students, and each record there may have some of sub records. So in that case, you can use the structure. So take an example, how can you use? So let's have is the first structure. Let's have struct with the keyword struct. Let's have the name of the structure is str1. Let's have they have some of the data type 1. Take some of the variable 1. Let's have data type 2. Let's have some variable 2. Similarly, after this, you can have another structures. Let's have str2. Then you can declare how many number of sub record against each record. So let's have data type, some of the data type x. Let's have variable x, data type y, variable y, and you may as many number of the data type you wish to declare, you can list it out here. And this also should be end with semicolon. So suppose out the structures outside of the structure, they only have two type, and you may close it here. Now to access these variables, to access these attributes, we need some structure variable. So how can you define this structure variable? That should be struct str1, and we need some variables. Let's have capital A. And so for through this A, we can access variable 1. Through this A, we can access the variable 2, because this A has been defined as a variable against the structures 1. But what's about this variable x and variable y? Because variable x and variable y has been declared inside this structure. So to accessing this, we need also one structured variable or instance. So that instance must be defined inside this structure, because here if you define the struct of str2, let's have is b, it is not allowed, because the structures has not been defined outside. Instead, the structures is the nested structures, means str2 has defined inside this str1. So these instances must be defined here. Okay? So instead of this, you must have to declare the structure variable of this nested one, inner one, the inside of this one itself. So here either you may define like this, or if you wish, you may define the instances here also. The choice is yours, but you cannot declare outside. Is this clear? So this is the nested structures, and this is the basic syntax that we can use. Take an example, then perhaps it will be much clear to you. Write a program to store the record of n students that consist name, role, marks, or let's have name and role, and marks of physics, chemistry, and mathematics into another structure or another substructure. Okay. So here what we have been asked, we have been asked to write a program to store the record of n student that will consist what the every record will consist. There should be consist name, role, and there should be marks, and the marks of the physics, chemistry, and mathematics into another substructure. So here the marks of against every name, against the every record, there should have a 3 marks: physics, chemistry, and mathematics, and these the marks physics, chemistry, mathematics must be placed inside the another structure, that is be treated as a substructure. So okay, how can you do so? So as such, we know, let's have declare a shape of the structure first. So struct, let's have student. What it will consist? There should consist a name, so the name should be the string type, so characters name. Let's have the length of the string, length of the name, let's have 50 maximum. Roll numbers, let's have it will be the integer type. And now the marks would be in the another structure, so PCM. So here you may declare another structures. Let have struct, define the name of the structure, let's have is marks, and this structure will consist 3 marks: integers, physics, let's have the marks of the physics, chemistry, mathematics may comes in the integer type. So choice is yours, either you may define as a float or the integer. So for the example here, I am going to take as the integer type. So physics, chemistry, and mathematics, all the 3 are going to have the integer type. Here we may close it. You might declare the accessing variables. We may declare the marks variable or instances. So let's have it is x, and you may close these structures, and you may declare as a how many students, n number of students. So we do not know how many number of the students, so you may declare the a, let's have is 100, maximum 100 number of the students that we are going to be stored. So here we are going to use the array of structures. Okay, is this structure is ready? Variable has already declared for accessing the marks of physics, chemistry, and mathematics. This is the x is the instance or the structure marks variable. Similarly, to for the name and roll number, we need the variable. So here we're going to store the record about n students. So here we have specified the array. We have defined the maximum size is 100. Now what we need, we'll have to define the main function. So here these structures can be defined outside the main as a global, or if you wish, you may declare inside of the main as well. The choice is completely yours. Now what we need the n first, so integer n, and for the iterations we need the I. So what I will have to ask the user first, how many number of the records. So for doing this, you may display the message printf, enter the number of students. So to get the input, you can have scanf %d of %n. Now n is ready. Now we'll have to store the record about n students. So here simply you may write like printf enter the record. You may give the \n for the new line. Here you may use the loop for I. It will start from 0. It will have I less than n, and it will have I plus plus. Now for storing the record, What's we need, you may ask. Printf enter, let's have name. I'm asking the name and roll number first, then we ask the marks about the physics, chemistry and mathematics. Enter name and roll number. Roll of percent d means this student, first student, second student, third student, or what. So gets, that is your AI dot name. Here we'll take the input as a name, and to take the roll number, scanf percent d of ampersand AI dot roll. So far we have taken the name and the role about the student. First means ith student. Now what we need, now every student there should have the marks about the physics, chemistry and mathematics. So here you may display the message printf enter the marks of P, C and M, like backslash n. So as a result, user will provide the input. So to take the input, scanf percent d, and percent d, they have a three inputs which are integer natures. Now we are going to store the AI records now. So here should be ampersand AI. Now for accessing the PCM, we need this instance for storing the marks of physics, chemistry and mathematics. So it should be AI dot x dot physics. Similarly, it should be ampersand AI dot x dot chemistry. Similarly, ampersand AI dot x dot mathematics. Is this clear? Now your structure, your problem is ready to take the input from the user, and similarly you can display the same. So for displaying purpose, you may write the appropriate code for display. That's it. This is the simplest example by which you can use the nested structure. I hope it is being clear to you. So thank you for your watching.